Hi, Ann. How are you? Thanks for being here.
Hey, John, great to be with you.
Really excited to talk to you today. I've known you for many years now, and you're actively focused in Parlay House, which has surprised me. It's a decade old now, and it's a group of women who I understand is 10,000 strong to
Yep.
create a sense of connection, belonging, lifting each other up. So, after successful stints running advertising agencies, chairing public companies where I met you, what prompted you to make this really what I imagine is your life's mission now?
It was a revelation that came from the lowest moment in my adult life, which was uh, even 10 years before Parlay House started. So we're talking 20 years ago. I was running, actually, it really wasn't 20 years ago. If I do the math right, it was about 12 years ago, I was running a turnaround company, and I'm a startup person. So I was already not in my element. I was doing it during a financial recession. So again, not in my element. And I got a call from my oncologist that cancer that I had thought I had conquered a number of years before was now starting to, replicate itself again, and I needed to have surgery. And I walked into my boss's office and said, I've been through this before. I'm going to take a couple weeks off. I'm going to have surgery and I'll be back to run the company. And he said, I'm going to have someone else run the company. And in an instant, I lost my job. I lost my health. My youngest daughter was about to go to college. And in that moment, I realized that without the definition of self as I'm Ann Devereux-Mills, I'm a CEO, I'm a mom, I'm a healthy person at the gym at 5:30 a.m. every morning. Without those things, I didn't know who I was. And so I started again at 50 years old, ground zero, trying to figure out who I was, what was important to me, what was missing from my life, and what I wanted moving forward. And what I wanted was not what I had. Because what I had was when I lost power, the majority of the relationships that I had, which were from the work world, disappeared. Because without power and without the transactional nature of our relationships, there was no depth there. There was no true authenticity. There was no safe place for me to be. So Parlay House was what I personally needed myself, which was, connection. And truthfully, to get outside of the bubble that I had been in my professional career. Because my bubble was, either my kids or my work. And I wanted to have more interesting experiences and get a broader view. So crazy me, I started Parlay House by inviting 12 strangers into my new home in San Francisco, where I moved after my health situation, moved from New York City to San Francisco to be with the man I was dating at the time. And, here we are 10 years and 10,000 women later, having really meaningful conversations about things that hit at the core to who we are.
I love that. That's such a powerful story, and it feels like your mission is to lift each other up. And this week, I was at an offsite, and we talked about leadership and how things like curiosity is above the line, defensiveness is below the line, and we talked about teams and what makes a successful team and a happy team. And everything that we discussed that was positive was above the line. And yet I don't always operate above the line. I'm not always
Yeah.
lifting people up when I should. What in talking to all of the women you speak to in your own personal experience, what stops us from being as high EQ as we can or lifting each other up all the time?
There's so many things. I mean, I think at the essence, business can't be like it is in just real life because obviously you have these huge drivers like generating revenue, you know, maintaining and achieving better profitability, growth. And those times, and I know this as someone who's run many organizations, necessitate tough decisions, necessitate letting people go, necessitate downsizing, necessitating shifts in business. But the thing that, even when you're doing those hard business things that can't always be above the line, you can do it with a mindset of seeing the other people in their humanity and understanding, even if you're not a woman to a woman or a man to a man, understanding that person, knowing that person as much as you can, and how whatever changes you're going to make will affect them. So that even when you do things that they're not going to have a positive reaction to in the workplace, they'll understand that you did it with them as a human being in mind and we're open to a conversation. I remember being coached by legal counsel when I was running that turnaround, and we had to go through many hard downsizings and course corrections. And they always said, "Look, we don't want to be sued, so don't say you're sorry. Don't show empathy. Don't say as little as possible, and get through this so that we don't risk." Having to pay more, or being in the middle of a lawsuit. And I really regret following that direction at the level that I did, because I've since had conversations with those people who were on the receiving end of those hard business decisions, and they weren't mad at me that the business wasn't doing well and we couldn't afford to keep them, but boy, were they hurt that we had really been friends in a business sense, and I couldn't handle it with the grace that marked the rest of my leadership. And so that was a wake up call to me, about, no matter what the situation, when we see each other in our total humanity and allow for imperfection, that we're able to operate above the line even when some of the stuff that we're doing is below the line.
Yeah, that is also extremely powerful. And you talked about whether it's a woman to woman or man to man. It makes me think that you mentioned to me that your podcast, Bring a Friend, is starting to bring men into the conversation, of
Yeah.
which a Parlay House has, I don't know if it's been exclusively, but focused on women to women. So I say this joking, half joking maybe. Why would you screw up something good by bringing men into the conversation?
Here's the amazing thing. When I am in a co-ed room of people and talk about what I do for the first time, there are a large group of men. Not all of them verbalize it, but most of them say, you know, not only do you need to do this for men, but men don't do what you're doing as well as women do already. We need help catching up, having vulnerable conversations, talking about things that are hard. We as men are held to standards that oftentimes don't leave room for emotional intelligence and for vulnerability and for feeling hurt or feeling insecure or feeling whatever the feelings are that men feel just as much as women do. We're in a society that doesn't allow for that. So while I might not be the person to lead a male group of this, there is a huge amount of room and need for that. And so, I think Bring a Friend, we try to craft conversations so that whether our guest is male or whether our content is universally applicable, we're very focused on that in our programming.
I love that, and I encourage everyone to subscribe and listen to Bring a Friend. I wanted to bring up the notion of, we're working remote. Hopefully, we're on the tail end of a pandemic here. And how do you think this has impacted our ability to lift people up, knowing that an in-person human connection is really important? At the same time, I have gotten a lot from working from home. So there are just all these puts and takes going on at the same time. How have you seen this impact the folks that you work with most
It's
closely?
it's funny. My husband and I were having this conversation just this morning because we were talking about our son-in-law, who is running a very successful startup business that now has over 500 employees, and he has a 4-month-old newborn, and is thinking about the future of work for him and his family and his company. And I said to my husband, if we hadn't been forced for 2 years to do business remotely, none of us who believe in the power of culture could imagine that you could create positive workspaces without people, 5 or 6 days a week, 10 hours a day being in an office.
Right.
And, then we conceded certain businesses, like the one that I come from, where creativity is at the core of what you do. necessitates that groups of people are able to build off of each other incredibly collaboratively. I think for many creative businesses, doing that in person, at least to some extent, is crucial. But what we've also seen, and I never ever would have believed that um, thoughtful interactions like the one you and I are having virtually right now, where we see each other as people, where we talk about hard issues, where we sort of acknowledge the imperfection of both the work environment and the world environment, can still happen virtually. So, in some ways, I'm discouraged because I love being face to face with people. And don't want a world where we're all sitting in front of our screens interacting with, automated versions of ourselves. The metaverse does not intrigue me in the way that it's sort of being spelled out. But I do have hope in um, the distance allowing us to have a little bit more flexibility in what we accept, to see people in their native environments in a way that
Hmm.
makes them more human, to understand the complexities of lives beyond work when your 4-year-old is running back and forth in front of the screen and the dog is barking, and this is reality. So it does bring us closer into each other's homes in a weird sort of way. I'm cautiously optimistic that there's some hybrid that will be good for everybody.
Yeah, it feels like the smartphone brought work to home a decade ago. Now it's at this entirely entirely different dimension. Some things I've noticed when I've gone back to the office are like I appreciate what makes the office special, I think, more than I did.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, and I'm hoping that at Centerfield we strike a balance between working at home, working in office, getting the best of both worlds, as opposed to it being a
Yep.
trade off. Um, I said this when we connected last week, which is thank you for mentoring me earlier in my career as I made a transition from analytics and product management into marketing. And I feel like what I was looking for at the time was like a combination of tactical direction and confidence, if you will.
Sure.
And for the people that you mentor, what do you see as kind of like the common threads, if you will, across the folks that you mentor, either in a group or individually?
I think confidence is definitely a big thing, and anybody who has someone in the company that's at a level more junior than you will look up to you as a point of validation and a guide, and hopefully a safe space to ask questions that allow them to be stronger. And I think a lot of us look for mentor relationships that are very, very seasoned people helping people just getting started. But in fact, most of the relationships that I had in the business world were two-way mentoring, where we could each, as a leader, you need feedback from the people that you're trying to lead that you're doing something well too. So
So
even
true.
when I was mentoring you, for example, John, the fact that you would keep coming back, that you'd be comfortable talking about the things that you were struggling with, that you would ask questions, that said to me, oh, I've established a relationship of trust and of mutual respect that's allowing for open dialogue that makes each of us better. So, I think that there is our humanity that leaders need to show. Leaders need to show when we're feeling vulnerable or stretched too thin, or second guessing ourselves, which we all do. And when we behave in a way that reveals our total humanity, we allow space for others to feel the same. And some of that insecurity and cautiousness and figuring out your road becomes a little easier, because no matter how high you get, you're still growing. If you have a growth mindset, you're still learning. You're still thinking about the next step. Even people like Beyonce are constantly looking for how to up their performance. No one ever gets to the top and says, great, I've made it. I don't need to learn. I don't need to grow. I'm not afraid. I have every clue about what to do in every situation. That's just not reality. So I think that that's the common truth is, whether I'm mentoring someone or I'm learning from someone, we're all just in it together.
Yeah, that's fair, and I think that really resonates to me. Um, the time that I'm speaking about when we worked together, you were chairman of the board at a public company.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you were really encouraging me and the rest of the company to do was to think about our brand and our customer experience.
Hmm.
Whereas I see, at least the way that I saw it, the rest of the board's strengths, in my mind at least, were about operations. Maybe I'm painting too broad of a brush, but as I see this podcast is for marketers, how do marketers get heard in the boardroom? I guess that's really the question that I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, and I think marketers have the benefit of being closest to the unmet customer need. I mean, the reason that Parlay House is now relevant to thousands of women around the world is because it started with an incredibly authentic insight of the need for a sense of belonging in a safe space to know you're not alone in having hard conversations. It was my need. I didn't know one other person that had that need until I expressed some of my stuff, and other people who didn't know me said, "Oh my God, I feel the same way. Me too." And so I think as marketers, when we're closest to the actual customer experience, we're able to translate that into strategic insights and into programs that do result in a stronger bond between the customer, whether it's the business customer or the consumer customer, and the product that's being sold. And it's just so easy to substitute analytics or, unfortunately, just hard numbers like, top line growth and EBITDA for insights that actually are going to be driving those things. But, which do you start with? Do you start with the end goal of year over year growth, or do you figure out what's the relevance of what you're doing to achieve the most deep connection with those customers? Those insights create loyalty, create repeat purchases, differentiate brands that are parity brands. And so, yeah, I come from the same background as you do, where marketing is key. But boy, I've never seen a CFO have all of the insights that drive a company towards great success. They certainly know how to make sure we don't get in trouble, to ensure the most clean functioning of a financial system. They can often provide insights about how to optimize the financial flow, but the real value of any product or service is how it affects the human being, and that's what marketers do.
Totally, I agree, and I think early in my career, sometimes I would kind of bang my head against the wall, saying, "Oh, why doesn't everybody see the world in the way that I do?"
Mm.
And then it took me realizing that the CFO may be thinking the same thing about me.
For
and if we
sure.
just yeah, and if we try to understand what our roles are, isn't exactly what I'm trying to say, but like our different perspectives,
Yep.
then we can come to the best decision.
We did in this company that I was running this turnaround. When I came in, I took over an executive team who didn't know me and I didn't know them, and there were definitely some struggles in those first few months. And one of the things that we did with the guidance of an executive coach was everybody took the Strengthsfinder quiz, which is fun, and it
Yeah, it is fun.
essentially it's only positive, and it gives you your five most significant strengths attributes, and we each put our five strengths up on a piece of paper on a tacked up wall without attribution. So you didn't know it was mine, and I didn't know it was anybody else's. And we walked around the room and guessed whose was each person. Everybody got to guess. It wasn't like group think. It was everybody got to say, this is Phil and this is Sarah and this is Anne. And um, what was amazing is we got it right a good part of the time. We missed out a part of the time. And then we realized how much we needed the strengths of the people that were most different from us for a completely well rounded business. So while the CFO frustrated the hell out of me because he was always saying no and was cautious and conservative and, very different than my approach to business, I was not detail oriented in the way that he was, and he could really provide some rational bumpers to our, free spirited creative work. And so that helped everybody appreciate everybody um, it validated what I did, but it also validated what he did.
I like that term that you just used, free spirited creative work. And I'd actually like to zoom backwards even a little bit more, perhaps before the turnaround company. I know you were in the agency world for a
Yeah.
while, running agencies, and I think you focused on pharma and health. I may be
I
wrong.
did. I
Okay.
did. Although at BBDO, I was. This is crazy. You won't even remember these days. You probably weren't born, John. But there used to be days where the advertising world was only about TV, print, and out of home. Those were the
Hmm.
three ways that you could advertise. So, with when BBDO has huge clients at the time, it was GE and FedEx and monstrous companies, and we were trying to introduce them to shockingly digital marketing. And it was foreign to them. And
Right.
so my job as the chief integration officer was to include digital communications as part of their marketing plan and trying to convince them of that. And the nice thing is, between me and other people who did that kind of work, there's no need for a chief integration officer anymore because digital is at the essence of what everybody does. But during that time I worked on all sorts of brands, but my expertise was indeed in healthcare.
Yeah, and you answered this question a little bit just a moment ago, but I I wanted to. So you were oftentimes working with CMOs at the
Yep.
brand,
Yep.
and at the time, like, what do you feel like they were getting right and getting wrong? And then, based on your observation of working with marketing leaders today, is it the same, or are they getting wrong different stuff, getting right different stuff? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm not sure you can make universal um, connections between those. I think the marketers that got it right were the ones that were more open-minded.
Hmm.
When you're a CMO and you look at the turnover rate in that job compared to other job functions, CMOs last less long than many other executive positions because their decisions are more subjective than other roles. So much harder to measure, especially in the early days for me when a TV campaign couldn't be measured particularly easily. I mean, you could measure year over year performance, but you couldn't measure minute by minute uh, performance. And so, I think that the subjective nature of creativity always makes it harder for the CMOs. And the more that they impose their preferences and views of what was best, as opposed to basing it on strategic insights, market research, and performance-based metrics that allowed iteration, the further away from success they got. And I don't think that's any different now. We just have a lot more tools these days to measure. And I think maybe the risk these days is relying so heavily on the data that the human information piece doesn't get reinfused into the questions often enough.
I agree with that a lot, and I also think a lot about that notion that CMOs tend to stay in their position a lot less often than CFOs
Mm.
or others. And I do think the subjective nature is part of that. I also wonder if CMOs, by and large, sometimes have a playbook within which they operate, and and the difficulty to pivot away from that playbook or to iterate on that playbook can be a challenge also. It's like marketing needs to be learning at a higher rate and doing different things at a higher rate than other parts of the
And it's
organization.
scary and hard for a growing organization to be in that state of flux a lot. And I think, it's hard for a CEO to show up and talk to his board about strategic direction. And, one quarter later, he's back to, or she's back talking about changes in direction because of what's happening from a marketing perspective. It's very hard for especially larger companies, but for all companies to be that agile when everybody reports to somebody.
Tell me
The
about it.
board's obligated to the shareholders, and there's almost never an end to who you got to convince about what you're doing, and changing direction is very very challenging for a company.
for sure. So Anne, what does the future hold for Parlay House?
You know, the nice thing is I know and I don't know, and I love that. I never would have been happy with the I don't know part of the answer. The part I know is will be now that I think we've taken COVID down to a reasonable level where we can go back to live events. We're in 12 cities around the world now. By the end of 2022, we should add 10 more cities and be reaching women in 22 cities live. And our we do virtual events where we have amazing people that join us for conversation every other week through Zoom. And you wouldn't believe it, John. During COVID, we had hundreds of people joining us for conversations, which we did weekly during the intensity of COVID, who said, "This is the highlight of my week. This connection, this taking me outside of my world, but also showing how it relates to me. Whether it's the expert on how to deal with the narcissists in your life, to the person who's very practically talking to you about financial independence, to the oldest woman to have climbed El Capitan, doing it at 68 years old without assistance. And you get information, you get inspiration, you get a sense of relevance and belonging that will carry us as long as I'm alive. This organization will reach more and more people with those sorts of conversations. What do we do beyond that? I mean, do I support a group of men who wants to start Parlay House for Men? Maybe. We've talked about a lot of growth opportunities, and we're doing some really amazing partnerships. Sort of back to my marketing roots. When we look at what we now have, which is a huge following of women who trust us and believe in us and have added value in their lives because of what we do, it creates incredible partnership opportunities with brands who have like-minded desires to have authentic conversations. So, sort of the sky is the limit in creating a new form of community. Our members are 20 years old, they're 80 years old, they're white and they're black, they're gay and they're straight. They have backgrounds that I know of and backgrounds I could never imagine. And the richness of the conversations that we have with people outside of our bubble give me great hope that the divide we feel in the country right now among segments of the population are not necessarily going to burden us forever. I really believe that we can ease closer and closer towards commonalities through doing things like this. So that's my view of the future, and I'm an optimist and a realist, but I think we have something good going on, and I'm not letting it go.
I really hope we can close those divisions, narrow them at the least.
Yeah,
That would
yeah,
that would be so beneficial.
yeah.
Thanks, Anne, so much for doing this. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
So fun to be reconnected.